Well, for more on the News Corp scandal and what it means to global newspaper businesses everywhere, we welcome a journalism expert. Mike Hoyt is the executive editor of the Columbia Journalism Review. He is joining us right here in the newsroom. Mike, thanks so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
You wrote an op-ed in the LA Times on Sunday, pointing out maybe what many of us have forgotten is that newspapers really have a lot of power, and in the UK's arena, even more so than here in the U.S.
Yeah, in newspapers, even in this age in which they're somewhat shrunken from what they used to be, are still the best at finding things out. They just dig and find things out, and that brings with it power. It's something we don't talk about much, but it does have a great deal of power.
Because we often pay attention to the revenue side of things, and as many people have pointed out with News Corp, the actual newsprint business, that part of its empire, only contributes about 10% to its revenue.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about how Rupert Murdoch loves newspapers. Well, of course he does. Look what newspapers did for him. He used them to accumulate power, and very successfully. He had a man in 10 Downing Street. He had a man in the Scotland Yard. So he misused that power. On the other hand, the genesis of this scandal is another newspaper, The Guardian, which plugged away.
Nick Davies, right, about 2 years ago, started digging into all these allegations, or I guess he had a hunch and he followed it.
He did, and he kept plugging away. Fairly lonely business. He had a gutsy editor. This is a newspaper of about 280,000 circulation compared to Murdoch's vast empire. But they kept going, and they found out things until they reached the straw that broke the camel's back, and this thing exploded. And that's a great plus for newspaper power. That's the use of power as a public service, as opposed to just the accumulation of more power.
So what do you think, if there is any long-term effect on newspaper businesses everywhere, that is to say News Corp's pieces and others as well, what will the effect of this phone hacking scandal be, if any?
I would think that regulators over there and over here will maybe give another thought to concentration of power, media power.
We know the UK opposition leader is actually calling for News Corp to be broken up, citing that abuse of power.
And that thought could occur over here as well. On the other hand, in a way, this is a great plus for newspapers. This was an abuse of power. It happened to be media power, and that's what public service journalism does at its best. And that's what The Guardian did. They brought this scandal to the fore, and finally, when people really understood it, they were shocked by it. And
tomorrow is going to be a pretty big day in the UK. We know that Rebekah Brooks is meant to testify. Of course, the former CEO, News of the World, stepped down on Friday. She, it seems like now, would like people to believe that when she called the then UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown to talk about his son's cystic fibrosis, that she was doing a public service. But you say that's completely nonsense, and it was all about showing who had to be afraid of whom.
I think what this scandal teaches us about News Corp is that the word for the corporate culture there is cynical. It's a pretty cynical operation, and they were all about using their media power for their own ends. And I think that phone call was about who should be afraid of who. I mean, that's what it was. They used the power of investigation to scare people, to scare members of Parliament, to contain a police investigation. It's actually pretty shocking when you gather it all in.
So the rogue journalists who follow their hunch and expose monopolies and too much power in the wrong hands, I guess we can say, will be still heroes. Thanks very much. Mike Hoyt joining us there.
Thank you.
He is from the Columbia Journalism Review.